There are plenty of discussions to be had, and we are so grateful that we have with us none other than Professor Jane Drake Brockman as our session moderator. So please allow me to introduce her. Jane has a long association with APEC and is widely recognized as one of the region's foremost experts on trade in services and digital trade. She is the founding director of the Australian Services Roundtable and co-convener of the Asia Pacific Services Coalition, and has also served on the executive committee of the Hong Kong Coalition of Services Industries. She holds a visiting fellowship at the Institute for International Trade at the University of Adelaide and serves as a co-chair of the T20 Task Force 1 on Trade and Investment. Jane has deep trade policy experience across business, academe, government, and international government. She has served with the International Trade Center in Geneva, OECD Trade Directorate in Paris, and the Commonwealth Secretariat in London. In 2021, Jane was engaged by ABAC to assist in the business input to the midterm review of the APEC Services Competitiveness Roadmap. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our moderator for the discussions today, Professor Jane Drake Brockman. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you very much, Ginge, and thank you very much to Aboitiz and to ABAC and ABAC Philippines in particular for inviting me today. I'm going to be very quick because we have a very rich set of panelists, but I just want to make a couple of introductory remarks. This event's about sharpening your edge. Now, that's a really straightforward business way of saying what the APEC policy community calls enhancing your competitiveness. We're focusing on the fastest growing sector of all APEC economies, that is the services sector, and more specifically, the digitally enabled services sector, which is growing even faster. So this event's about sharpening your edge, whether you're an individual worker, a single business, a cluster of businesses, a local jurisdiction, an economy, or an entire APEC region. The objective is that the Asia Pacific workforce achieves greater international competitiveness in digital services. Now, most APEC economies now do have digital transformation strategies. All of these strategies recognize the inherent importance of attracting digital investment and building digital skills, whether across the board or in niche export opportunities. Most of those strategies also recognize the need to learn from global and regional best practices, and many of them call for collaborative capacity building, technical assistance, policy dialogue, and regulatory cooperation. Today, the ABAC champion for services, Sabine Aboitiz, has taken the lead and put this topic firmly on the APEC agenda going forward. ABAC recognizes that cross-border dialogue is needed, including between the group on services, and I recognize Thomas Fine here, who chairs the group on services, and also the APEC working group on human resources development, and I recognize Dong Sung Park, who chairs that working group. Services stakeholders, especially in the digitally enabled sectors and in the education and training sector, will really hope that today's business initiative will prove worthy of prompting official follow-up. After all, it's a very timely business-led initiative on the part of Aboitiz and ABAC. APEC economies are looking at how best to build back better in the post-pandemic environment, taking more closely into account than ever before the very evident digital transformation underway, the implications of new business models for digital regulatory settings, digital trade governance, and on a global basis for more inclusive, more worker-centric, people-centric, citizen-centric action. And as we all know, anything job-centric ultimately needs to be skill-centric. As Richard Baldwin has written in his latest piece for the G20 and the APEC audience knows so well, trade, and policy openness to trade, increasingly to trade and digital services, always need to be part of the solution to greater economic inclusion and also to digital inclusion. I want to just remind the audience that the APEC Services Competitiveness Framework was born in Cebu, just like Aboitiz Foundation was born in Cebu in 2015 under Philippine leadership. And I will never personally forget the good old days of face-to-face public-private dialogue with a local audience of APEC senior officials and many hundreds of local SMEs and MSMEs. We saw some photos of those days in the video we've just witnessed. It is right that the Philippines initiate an inclusive, people-centric APEC conversation again right now, reminding the policy community that upskilling is everywhere, not just necessary, but urgent in order to employ people, to attract foreign investors, to service international clients, to participate in global value chains, and to build a niche export portfolio. We also know, and it goes right back to the documentation in 2015 drafted in Cebu, we know that the key enabling factors for services innovation and competitiveness are access to talent and access to data. These core business priorities are what we explicitly focus on today, and in particular, the associated skills need. And it's no surprise that the services sector has always actually been the people-centric sector, which is why the services sector contributes more to employment typically than it does even to GDP. Human resources have always mattered in the services sector. Traditionally, even in the analog economy, a services firm would spend up to 80% of its outgoings on human resources. So one of the questions we face today is, how much might this change? How will business expenditure on AI interact with expenditure on HI, on human intelligence, as we go forward? How central will HI remain? What kinds of jobs might be lost? What kinds of jobs might be gained? How will the benefits be distributed both locally and internationally? And to what extent and how will governments need to intervene to smooth the transition? Now, a few years ago, these were scary questions. Not so today. We are well into the transformation. We understand it better. We have new tools to measure and monitor it. And we have some examples now of best practice policy responses, business successes, and best of all, we have a generation of differently trained individuals who get it, are out there doing it, and can help guide the conversation forward. And we have a larger community of businesses that get it, worry about it, and are doing something about it. So we're going to try to come up today with some policy and regulatory recommendations to enhance APEC competitiveness in the digital economy. Some call it the tech sector. I call it the digital services economy, because the tech sector is part of the services sector, and technological intellectual property is not something you can drop on your foot. It's an intangible services asset. So in time, we'll all just accept this reality, take a holistic view, and just call it the entire economy.